What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. And yes, as the name of the video suggests, we are going to be talking Devastators today. More specifically, I have two builds to share with you because I really do believe that the Devastator is one of those classes, or is probably the class that benefits the most from playing it differently, whether you're doing expeditions solo or whether you're doing them in a group. When you're doing them in the group, I think that the role that the Devastator can play is more of a support debuff kind of role, where they really excel in, especially their movability, you know, across the map, and also the kind of debuffs that they can put on enemies, and that they're not necessarily going to be the primary damage dealers. Now, by no means am I saying that Devastators are not good at dealing damage, and that's just simply not the case. This was a reputation that Devastators had at the very beginning of the game, where they were seen as the red-headed stepchild of not being able to deal enough damage. That has long since been proven to not be the case through various different builds, you know, bleed builds, you know, basically anomaly builds. So this is not a, you know, what I'm trying to do when I space these two builds apart. I am not trying to say one is a DPS build and the other isn't. Because the support or debuff build that I'm showing you can very much still deal a lot of damage. It's just you're going to mean a lot more for the group if you're actually able to debuff bosses or groups of mobs, and basically make it easier for, let's say for instance, a bullet techno to clean up all the minions that you debuff and basically do a lot of damage to them. And that's really the point of the group play, I would say. And it's interesting to be able to play the game in such a way as well. For me, it has been kind of rewarding to kind of not so much focus on dealing damage, but rather to make a little mini game for myself of just seeing, you know, where I can throw debuffs and where I can apply pressure to certain bosses that allow the DPS characters to swoop in and get the kills. Nonetheless, done with the introduction, let's jump right in. And the first one we're going to look at is the cookie cutter solo DPS build. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is that I use the same set of weapons for both builds. So basically, because I use the same weapon strategy for this. But again, if you're looking for something that is not using Fortress and not using Moaning Winds, unfortunately I have to disappoint you right off the bat and say that at this moment this combo is so powerful, and not just on other characters but also on Devastated, that it really is, if you have access to it, probably one of the best options that you can have. Can you use other weapon combinations? Of course. It's just, this is, especially due to the fact that you might be playing other classes where you use this combination, it is such an easy transition just to use exactly the same setup with your Devastator. And of course Fortress is always going to be strong, so you know, it's kind of like no reason not to use it. So obviously then that means that I have a death shield with Shadow Comet on. I personally love Shadow Comet, so I kind of slap it on most of my guns because I just really like the ability to poke long range with, you know, quite a lot of DPS, you know, dropping down or something, and being able to do it every 3 seconds is phenomenal. Now then, of course, I'm also using the Anemoy, which has Moaning Winds and Fortress on it, and then I'm using Torment and Agony, which has Moaning Winds and Clip Combustion on it. The essential combo here, like with you know, a lot of builds that use this, is that you use your main weapon, in my case the death shield, to open up shots and get, you know, Shadow Comet laid in on a couple of minions, and as you close the distance and get close to them, you switch out Anemoy and the pistols to essentially apply Moaning Winds every time it comes off cooldown, just basically pushing out a lot of damage, especially the Moaning Winds combined with Fortress, which actually deals quite a bit. I don't have exceptionally highly rolled. For instance, my death shield is very mediocre, but still deals quite a bit of damage. Again, just showcasing really how powerful Fortress is. But nonetheless, obviously this could benefit from having, you know, a higher DPS Fortress. But I mean, it's not a train smash. We really only want it for the abilities. And I'm sorry, I meant highly a higher damage death shield. When we go over here, of course, this is using the Seismic Commander set, because what I want to be doing is I want to be applying bleeds to everything. So actually, before we go through the 5 pieces here, let's quickly just look at skills. So I use Earthquake and I use Impale, which are the 2 skills which are most impacted by Seismic Commander, the legendary set. But then I do know that some builds, you know, they use Golem. I know some builds use Gravity Leap to close the distance to things. I know some builds that use Tremor, because Tremor actually benefits from a lot of the buffs from the skill tree as well for for Seismic Commander, but in my case I prefer to use Endless Mass. I'll explain a little bit more about this when we're a bit later on in the video, but those are my 3 skills there. And of course, very fast earthquakes at 6.7 seconds rather. And 16.2 seconds on an impale, which is not that great, but still good because you get 3 impales with Seismic Commander. You also get 3 earthquakes, of course, and then Endless Mass is on 16.8, and you get 1 of those. Now, just the last thing about the rotation for this is those 16-second cooldowns sound like a lot, but the point is, remember that you are also working them into a rotation where you're applying Moaning Winds in between them. So once you get into the rhythm of this build, you kind of like always have something to do. You always have something coming off cooldown that you can apply, whether it's, you know, just dropping 3 new earthquakes on a bunch of minions, or, you know, going impale, Moaning Winds, impale, Moaning Winds, earthquake, Endless Math, you know, impale. So there's some flexibility there in terms of how you deploy the skills. But one thing that I've come to like about the Devastator that I found you know, a little bit different with the Pyromancer is that with the Pyromancer you often have some downtime because your cooldowns are so really fast that there are going to be times that you're going to be waiting for something to come off cooldown and you won't really have anything to do. Devastator, as I said, is not the case because all of those things that I just mentioned right now, I haven't even talked about the melee, which also is really powerful with the Devastator and is definitely something that is worth working into your rotation. If we go to the class itself here, I will show this. So bottom tree Seismic Commander, I believe, is also fairly standard. It is pretty much the way that it's played. Specifically, some highlights that I want to point out here is obviously as we go down the tree here, the point is just I'm picking up as many cooldown reduction nodes as I can for my Earthquake and my Impale. I'm also making sure to pick up every bleed buff that I can so that I either increase the duration of the buff or I increase the damage that it deals. Now, Strong Arm of the Law is kind of like a... For this particular build, where I take it or I don't take it, it doesn't really make a difference. But considering that that's 1 point, it's really the best thing that I can get out of all the available slots that are available to me with 1 point. Something else, Protected by the Anomaly, really, especially if you're stacking obviously a lot of Anomaly, which this build does, then that really pushes your armor in, you know, insanely high. As you can see, me just standing still, I have 144k, which maxes out the top level of reduction that you can actually get. Or basically, there are so many diminished returns at this point that it doesn't really make sense to have any more. But that gives you physical damage reduction of 74% essentially, which is phenomenal. Again, here as well, Skilled Sentry is great because you're using your skills so much. Every time when a skill ends, you are also getting another 20% of armor and another 20% of resistance, which is insane. You are incredibly chunky with this build, and you literally can face tank brood mothers and behemoths while just applying your skills, and you should be 100% fine. At least that's the case for me and what I've experienced. Last but not least, I just want to mention the fact that you'll notice that I don't pick up blood donation here, and blood donation on paper sounds phenomenal. You're healed for 25% of your bleed damage, but by looking at feedback that I found from other Devastator players on the internet and also my own testing, either this doesn't work or it works some of the time. In my opinion, it doesn't work at all, because testing this particular thing and actually getting life from bleeds back versus just the life you get from skills life leech, for instance, I feel that in my particular case I can only really see the skills life leech being applied. So that to me means that either blood donation is being affected by something somehow that it is not actually working, or the effect is so incredibly small and not the actual 25% as it mentions here, because whether I have this on or not, the life gain that I get is negligible. It makes almost no difference. But nonetheless, mileage for you may vary. This game is very strange, and when we talk about Despair, for instance, which is another mod as well, for some people will test this and show you that it doesn't work at all, and then some people will show that it works out perfectly. I think it might also be platform related, but that's of course, you know, a question for a different day. Now lastly, let's just quickly run through the 5 items here and I'll explain it. Of course, Ultimate Impaler and Second Quake is on here because you want to have as many times that you can use Impale and as many times as you can use Earthquake. Earthquake basically being the primary damage dealer of this build, I would say, from an abilities perspective. On the chest, I have Palisade and I have Earth Legacy. Earth Legacy is really important to get because Earthquake's distance by default is not that far. And this really does help you to reach 2 or 3 or 4 rows behind, you know, in terms of enemies or stuff that's up on a cliff or in a room or anything like that. So it's kind of mandatory as well. On the pants, I have Tainted Blood. Tainted Blood is one of the 2 buffs, or sorry, mods that you can pick up that actually increase the damage dealt to enemies that are bleeding. So this, combined with the 50% that you get from the set bonus, combined with another mod which is just below, gives you just an insane amount of damage to something that is bleeding, that has the bleed status effect on it. Blood Shock is also important because by default your Earthquake actually does not apply bleed. So if you put Blood Shock on the mod on, then of course your Earthquakes, they provide the bleed effect on enemies. On the gloves, I have Bloody Boost. This is the second mod, as I've mentioned now. So you have Tainted Blood with its 25% and Bloody Boost with its 15%, giving you 40% plus the 50 from the set bonus. So that's giving you 90% additional damage to enemies that are bleeding, which is phenomenal. I have Ground Crush on this glove, which basically increases the base damage of my Earthquake as well. And since I can drop 3, that's quite a big increase, and it ramps up considerably after that first Earthquake that applies the bleed, and then the 2 following Earthquakes after that, or an Impale, for instance. On my boots, I have Sharpened Spike, which also increases the power of Impale, and then I've got Extra Quake, which gives me my 3rd Earthquake. So all in all, this then allows me to have 3 Earthquakes, 3 Impales, 1 what is it called, Endless Mass, I almost said Bloody Mass. And again, like I said, the point of this build is essentially then just to mow your way through everything, trying to get everything to stand in a cone, applying the Earthquake with, you know, bleeds to it, impale things that are low life. Sometimes you can 2 or 3 impales in a row to rapidly drop something's life down and kill it. And that's basically it. Some last points about this particular build before we move to the second one. As I mentioned, I'm personally am not a huge fan of this build, and I think it's for 2 reasons. One, overall, it's not really easy to track down enemies that are trying to avoid you, like snipers, and, you know, trying to avoid around the map. So one thing that I really hate about this is that I tend to run around and try to, like, you know, catch, you know, minions that are trying to get out of the line of fire or trying to snipe me from far away. And it's a little bit irritating, but I do realize that this is also because I played Pyromancer a lot before I switched to Devastator. And Pyromancer is, of course, that's not a problem. You have no issue with catching things that are, you know, 30-40 meters away from you because of the way how Pyromancer skills work, or because of the way how you build them. So I think that might also just be like a pet peeve from my side, because, you know, I, you know, particularly happen to really enjoy the Pyromancer and happen to like the fact that I can reach across the battlefield, which you kind of have to put in a little bit more work with the Devastator. And the second point that I want to make about the Devastator is the Devastator is a much more involving class to play in terms of positioning and knowing where you should be during a fight. I don't mean that in the way that you stand a risk of dying, because again, like I said, you are quite sturdy and it really takes quite a bit to kill a Devastator, especially someone that understands the class, understands how to work the melee into the rotation, and understands how to basically make sure that you're always getting, you know, ticks, you know, on your skills, life leech and so on, and you're always getting, you know, life back. I think positioning is incredibly important to understand with the class, and therefore it is a more difficult class to play, if I can put it that way. I think Pyromancer is a lot more easy mode, and essentially just, you know, sort of getting your rotation correctly and applying your debuffs correctly so that you can get the maximum effect of damage from there. I'm not comparing the two with each other and saying one is, you know, easier to play and therefore worse or better or anything like that. They're just different. But Devastator has definitely been like something where I found like I have to really pay more attention as to how I position myself in a fight, and consequently how I use my skills. And I've actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. It's nice to go from something like a Pyromancer, which can feel in some cases maybe a little bit boring, and then you go to the Devastator, and more specifically when we get to the second build right now, something that feels like, you know, it just takes a little bit more effort, and if you're that kind of person, then maybe you enjoy that more as well. One last thing before we move over to the second build, I just want to say, with your purple pieces, right, you want to be picking up either anomaly power, status power, and cooldown reduction, or you want anomaly power, skills, life leech, and cooldown reduction. You really do want that cooldown reduction, and of course, because this is an anomaly build, you want the anomaly power. So the odd one out there is the status power. Skills, life leech, I think is fine as well, but status power really does help because it makes the bleeds hit harder. So that's it for this build, and then what we'll do now is we'll look at the second one, which I kind of enjoy a little bit more. So the second build is I think more, at least for me, more suited for group play, because as mentioned before earlier right at the start of the video, this is something that's more meant for a support kind of role, or debuffing enemies as much as possible, especially bosses or elites. And the build I'm already thinking about a beer, right? The build's kind of like suited for that more so. So as mentioned, the weapons stay exactly the same. I've not really changed any of them. And before we get into the actual armor pieces, let's have a look at the skills. So particularly here, I'm using Gravity Leap, I'm using Golem, and again, I'm using Endless Mass. Now, here you'll see the Gravity Leap is at 12.4 seconds cooldown. My Golem is at, and let me just make 100% sure that it's applied the right cooldowns. So, you see. So, something to bear in mind is when you're switching from one build to another one, this screen will sometimes not update until you actually go out to your character, out of the inventory and come back in. So I've just done that right now. I was saying like my cooldowns didn't look that sexy. So Gravity Leap is at 9 seconds, which is really good. My Golem's at 14 seconds and Endless Mass is at 11 seconds. So quite a bit lower than the Endless Mass that we saw in the previous build, which was coming in at around 16 seconds. Now, for the class itself, you'll notice that this is a little bit of a different one, as I'm not picking up one of the end nodes in any one of the three. But essentially, the emphasis of this build, as you see here right now, is again definitely trying to get as much cooldown reduction, wherever I can pick it up, but also to try and empower your melee as much as possible, as well as your resistance piercing, because that plays a big role in this particular build. Now, the point is that when we look at the mods later, you'll understand why this is so important. But just to again point out the obvious here, I'm actually not picking up too many of the bleed increase mods, because I'm not really going to be focusing on bleed damage itself. What you are doing is you're pushing up here to the top here, and you're getting strong arm of the anomaly, which after using your class melee skill increases the resistance piercing by 15% for each hit enemy for 10 seconds. So basically, if you run up and do an AoE melee into like 4 or 5 mobs, you are essentially getting 60 to 75% additional resistance piercing, and that's going to be important just now when we look at the rest. We're also just picking up some damage mitigation and all of that along the way. But overall, something that you'll notice with this particular build is that this is a lot less tanky than the previous build that we were looking at. So you really have to concentrate on when you're using Golem, because Golem is still badass to use, but of course it's a skill that can go on cooldown. And that's also why we pick up Paladin, because Paladin, as soon as you activate Golem, gives you an insane amount of additional anomaly power for 10 seconds. So then if we go to the actual skills themselves, well, rather the mods, and have a look at it, I'm using the Martial set. And the Martial set is mostly about empowering Endless Mass. As you can see here, Endless Mass pulls enemies and causes up to 4 of them to share 10% anomaly damage and 30% weapon damage for 5 seconds. Now, Endless Mass already does this. It already does this pulling effect, but with this set and some of the mods that you have here, you'll notice that it pulls the enemies from further away, and it also pulls a few more of them. Now, I purposely left the explanation of why I use Endless Mass when we were looking at the previous build, because I thought that we could cover it here. But basically the point is that, as I've mentioned, I do find certain situations where funneling minions into an area to do as much damage as possible is best for this kind of build, or for this kind of character, for the Devastator, because you have situations where mobs can try and get away from you, get away far, And while I was playing with this particular setup, I liked Endless Mass so much that I started incorporating it in my previous build, which is what I showed you in the first one. Now, the point is that if you play Endless Mass correctly, what you can do is you can often get into situations where minions can sort of start moving out apart from each other, and you can throw an Endless Mass. It pulls a large amount of them closer to one another, and you can Earthquake on top of that, or you can, for instance, Gravity Leap on top of that. So there are situations where Endless Mass really is quite useful and becomes quite clutch, and I've just fallen in love with it for that ability to sort of bring stuff together and essentially hit it. Now, I want to say something at this point in time, and that is that Devastators seem to be one of the classes that are affected the most by whether you're the host in a multiplayer game or not. Now, if you're a long-time player of Outriders, you already know that this is a problem with, for instance, bullet builds, where, you know, your bullet refresh doesn't happen because due to the desync that between you and your partners that you play with if you're not the host of the game. But that is unfortunately something that I've found with the Devastator as well, where bad connection to your host in a co-op session or just bad latency can actually screw you up a lot and actually make some of your debuffs, some of your abilities, some of your mods act in weird ways where it seems like they're not applying or they're not happening. So this is an unfortunate thing. It's not all the time, but it is something that I do want to mention, however, so that if you go and try this out and you play co-op with one of your buddies and they're the host, and you suddenly see, shit, my despair is not applying, or my bleeds aren't ticking correctly, or something like that, that this might in actual fact be the reason. And at least that's been the case for me, and again, some of the tests that I found. This situation is exasperated by, you know, things like crossplay and stuff like that. So it is an unfortunate byproduct of the game being peer-to-peer and not having service, and it's unfortunately the thing. You can kind of like, I mean, if you are playing the Devastator, then maybe you can try and wangle it in such a way that, you know, you're the host or something like that, or you can take turns with your buddies or something like that if it happens to be a problem. But in any case, back to the build. If, as mentioned, then the Marshall set here, again, using the same as with the previous build, using the headpiece, the chest piece, and the pants, because these are the three pieces that have anomaly on them. The other two pieces, the gloves and the gloves and the boots, in both cases have max health on them, so those are the pieces that we don't want. I have wide horizons on here, which increases the radius of Endless Mass, which is always good. It pulls them from further away, and this is phenomenal. I've seen this skill do weird things where it'll actually push, pull like bigger enemies, like a behemoth or something like that, actually closer, and also in some cases pulling stuff through railings and so on. So the mod can, the skill can be a little bit sketchy sometimes, but generally speaking, it does some miraculous shit depending on where you drop it down. Bear in mind though that Endless Mass is one of those things that can be resisted by an enemy, especially more like tougher enemies that have full life. So sometimes you need to drop a little bit of damage on something and then Endless Mass on them, and then it happens more consistently. When the Endless Mass is resisted, then basically it goes on a short little cooldown and you can essentially cast it again. I use Human Comet here as well, which increases the impact damage of Gravity Leap, which is quite important because Gravity Leap is one of the big ways that this build deals damage. Then if we go over to the chest piece, I've got High Intensity here, which says anomaly damage against affected targets is increased by 33% for 5 seconds. So again, this is one of your first debuffs, right? So when you Endless Mass something and it's got all those mobs together, for the next 5 seconds, they will take 33% additional anomaly damage. Despair is super powerful and is one of the most powerful mods that the Devastator has access to. Now, Despair essentially makes that whatever gets damaged by your Gravity Leap as you land takes 1.5 times more anomaly damage for 5 seconds. This is a huge debuff, but unfortunately, in some of the testing that I've done, but also some of the things that I've seen other players do, sometimes Despair does not apply. And again, that issue that I mentioned about the desync if you're not the host comes to play. Funnily enough, one of the ways that I get around this is with this build, you have multiple Gravity Leaps. So the second Gravity Leap, if the first one fails, the second one usually applies it. Now, this is kind of bullshit because you're losing out on a lot of damage there, but I'm just giving you an idea for what you can do to sort of play around this. But nonetheless, Despair is ridiculously clutch and really good. And Despair actually comes from the Marshall gear, but from the boots. All right. So then on the third piece, the pants, here I have Power Assimilation, which is by default on there now. Power assimilation boosts your anomaly power by 11k essentially for every elite present on the battlefield. But this is a little bit misleading, because in testing this, and you can go see this for yourself, sometimes it's not just elites that actually boost up your anomaly. So there are certain, you know, mob types which are considered, you know, higher level, or, you know, not like normal standard mobs, and they will also engage this boost. So it's not uncommon for you to have you know, anomaly increase coming from not just the one captain that's standing around, but maybe 2 or 3 other minions as well. This again could be buggy behavior. It's not entirely clear, but this is this buff, sorry, this mod is a lot, you know, better than it just comes off right at the bat when you look at it. Now, the second mod on here is Unstoppable Force, and this is actually a mod that comes from the Pyromancer. And it's in one of the Pyromancer sets, and this increases your anomaly power by 50% of your resistance piercing. And this is why I said this resistance stacking or resistance piercing stacking is so important. Now, this increases your anomaly power by 50% of your resistance piercing. Now, by default, this build has 30% resistance piercing, so I'm already just getting straight off the bat 15% additional anomaly power based on the value of my anomaly power. Now, when you then start doing melees and you increase that by, let's say, 60%, then your anomaly power increases by another 30%. So essentially, as the fight goes on and as you're able to manipulate more of these melees for shorter amount of times, you can have quite a bit of additional anomaly power, which of course also affects the hits that you produce with your gravity leaps, and also the damage that you know, put on minions with endless mass. So a great rotation to learn and to work in basically your melees into this build. Melee with this, especially the way that this class is set up, is super important. Then on the fourth piece, I've got Bone Crusher on here, which is endless mass increases. Its skill damage essentially increases, which is just a flat increase on more damage that it deals. Again, quick mention here, your purple pieces, what you want is you want anomaly power, cooldown reduction for sure, and then in this particular case, skills life leech is probably better, although status is not too bad. It's not the end of the world if you have status on there. I wouldn't say, if you have a good mod distribution, it's not worth throwing it away because it has status instead of skills life leech, but in this particular case you want skills life leech instead of status power. I also have Captain Hunter on here for the additional damage, again, to, you know, like captains or elites for that matter. Then in the boots, I have Life Absorption on here, which is heals for 15% of the damage that you deal with a gravity leap. If the enemy dies, then you get 30% of the damage dealt. Again, this is slightly less tankier and less durable than my previous build, and this is one of the reasons why I have Life Absorption in here. I also have Double Jump on here, which then basically means that I have more gravity leaps. And that's basically it. So as mentioned, this being more a debuff centric build, the idea here is to essentially play it like a support class and try to apply your endless mass and your gravity leaps to more chunkier minions, which allow them to take a lot more anomaly damage, which basically, you know, a trickster, an anomaly trickster, or a anomaly pyromancer. I don't really know if people play bullet pyromancers, but where those two classes will really love you for the additional amount of damage that they're able to deal when you drop these debuffs on the enemies. So that's it. Basically, that is the difference between the two builds, and that is the two builds that I consider using on my Devastator. I don't think I'll be making anything else for the Devastator, because I think these two are fairly powerful and basically the two ways in which I want to play the character. Of course, I'm always willing to try out something new, something more, but you know, that's pretty much it for the Devastator. I'll probably do 1 or 2 more tweaks here and there if I can, maybe try to get, you know, a higher rolled death shield, if that's even possible at this state in the game, maybe after the patch that comes out this week. But that's it for the Devastator. Now please go ahead and let me know in the comments down below which Devastator build you use, if this has been helpful to you in any way, which pieces are you hunting for, and just basically tell me what's going on with your character. Feel free to like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this kind of content. This is the stuff that I make for Outriders, but also for many other games, and that's at least the plan for the future. Outriders is very much the flavor of the week right now, or is that week, W-E-A-K? But yeah, I still play the game like quite a lot, and I'm actually doing a carry stream tonight. So if you are watching this video on the 21st of June, then there's going to be a carry stream tonight at 8 o'clock CEST. If you need any carries of any kind, whether it's CT1 to CT15, pop on in, join the Discord, throw your name in the hat, and I'll take you through that content. But other than that, that's it for today. It's just super important to me that you enjoy the rest of your day, and that means you should have a great morning, a great afternoon, an awesome evening, and until next video, fucking cheers.